when the world was younger and the boundaries between heaven and hell were tested by mortal ambition. Tonight we speak of Ureh, the light among lights, a kingdom whose very name once inspired reverence across all the known lands. But this is not merely a tale of glory. It is a chronicle of how the purest of intentions can become corrupted, and how even the most holy of places can fall to shadow. In the eastern reaches of Kehjistan, where the great mountain Nymyr cast its perpetual shadow across the land, there once stood a city unlike any other. Ureh was built into the very mountainside, its white marble walls gleaming even in the mountain shade. The kingdom was renowned throughout sanctuary as a beacon of piety and righteousness, a place where the faithful gathered to contemplate the divine. The city's architecture spoke of both grandeur and humility. Towering spires reached toward the heavens, while intricate carvings of archangels adorned every surface, their stone wings spread in eternal protection over the inhabitants below. The streets were paved with polished stones that seemed to catch and reflect even the faintest light, creating an ethereal glow that earned Ureh its title, the light among lights. But even in paradise, shadows can grow. During the era known as the Sin War, a time when the forces of heaven and hell waged their eternal conflict through mortal proxies, Ureh found itself under siege. Not by armies or siege engines, but by something far more insidious, the corrupting influence of the prime evils themselves. Diablo, the Lord of Terror, cast his gaze upon this shining city with particular malice. Here was a place that stood as everything hell despised, order instead of chaos, faith instead of fear, light instead of darkness. The very existence of Ureh was an affront to the Lord of Terror, and he would not suffer it to continue. The attacks were subtle at first. Travelers to Ureh would disappear on the roads. Strange whispers would echo through the night. Citizens would wake from nightmares they could not quite remember, but which left them shaken to their core. The very air around the kingdom grew heavy with an unnamed dread. It was during these dark times that Genghis Khan ruled over Ureh. A man of remarkable bearing and unshakable faith, Khan stood as tall as any warrior, with a noble countenance that inspired confidence in all who beheld him. His weathered features spoke of wisdom hard won, while his piercing green eyes held a father's love for every soul under his protection. Lord Khan was renowned not only for his piety, but for his dedication to protecting his people. When the demonic influences began to manifest, he did not cower or despair. Instead, he gathered his most trusted advisors, Gregus Mazi, a sorcerer of exceptional skill who was like a son to him, and Tobio, a priest whose faith was said to be as solid as the mountain itself. Together, this triumvirate worked tirelessly to shield Ureh from the encroaching darkness. They wove protective spells around the city, strengthened the faith of the citizens through prayer and ceremony, and stood vigilant against any sign of corruption. And then, in Lord Khan's darkest hour of doubt, when it seemed the shadows might finally overwhelm his beloved kingdom, a miracle occurred. In his dreams came a being of such radiance that even in sleep, Khan had to shield his eyes. An archangel, who named himself Mirakodus, appeared before the ruler of Ureh. The celestial being was everything the sacred texts described and more. Clad in armor of the brightest platinum with intricate runes covering his breastplate, Mirakodus radiated power and authority. From his shoulders, crackling tendrils of pure magical energy created the illusion of massive, fiery wings. His face, framed by cascading golden hair, held such perfection that Khan could never quite recall its exact features, only the overwhelming sense of beauty and righteousness. Genghis Khan, the archangel spoke, his voice like the harmonious ringing of 1,000 bells. Your people's faith has not gone unnoticed in the high heavens. I bring an offer of ultimate salvation, a path to transcend the mortal plane itself and join the heavenly host in eternal paradise. The promise was breathtaking in its scope. No longer would Ureh merely resist evil. It would rise above it entirely, beyond the reach of hell's grasp forever. What followed were months of preparation unlike anything the world had seen. Every priest and mage in Ureh was called upon to contribute to this monumental undertaking. The spell required was so complex, so demanding, that it pushed the boundaries of mortal understanding. Gregus Mazi and Tobio worked day and night, translating the visions Lord Khan received from Mirakodus into practical magical formulae. They discovered that the spell would need to draw upon the very forces that bound the mortal plane together, requiring perfect synchronization and absolute faith from every participant. The citizens of Ureh embraced their destiny with joy. To be chosen for such transcendence, to be lifted bodily into heaven itself, what greater honor could there be? They prayed, they fasted, they purified themselves in preparation for their ultimate journey. But Lord Khan, wise in the ways of both the divine and the mortal, knew that such a massive undertaking could not be accomplished in a single attempt. What if they failed? What if some unforeseen complication arose? His people would need a way to anchor themselves, to ensure they could complete their journey, even if the first attempt fell short. Thus were conceived the keys to shadow and light, two perfect crystals imbued with the power to anchor Ureh between the planes. The key to shadow, black as the deepest night, would be placed in the caverns far beneath the city. The key to light, gleaming like captured starlight, would rest atop Mount Nymyr itself. The creation of these artifacts required sacrifices from Khan and his daughter Etana. The young woman, blessed with hair like flames and eyes like emeralds, possessed her own considerable magical talents. Together, father and daughter poured their very essence into the crystals, creating anchors that could hold an entire city between realms. When the appointed time came, all of Ureh gathered in prayer. The stars aligned in configurations not seen for 1,000 years. The very air hummed with power as every priest and mage in the kingdom joined their voices in the great incantation. Lord Khan stood at the center of it all, his arms raised to the heavens, calling upon the power of Mirakodus to lift his people to their promised salvation. Gregus Mazi and Tobio flanked him, their own considerable powers feeding into the massive spell. The combined faith and magic of thousands rose like a beacon into the night sky. And then, at the crucial moment when the spell reached its crescendo, something went terribly wrong. According to the tales that would later be told, it was Gregus Mazi who betrayed them all. The trusted advisor, the man Lord Khan loved as a son, had supposedly corrupted the spell at the last moment, seeking to cast Ureh not into heaven, but down into the burning hells. But the truth, as truth often is, was far more complex and tragic. For you see, dear listener, it was not Gregus Mazi who had been corrupted. It was Juris Khan himself, the archangel Mirakodus who had visited his dreams, who had promised salvation and transcendence, was no agent of heaven. Behind that perfect face, beneath that radiant exterior, lurked something far more sinister. Diablo himself had come to Juris Khan in the guise of divinity. How does one corrupt the incorruptible? How does the Lord of Terror break a man whose faith is unshakable? The answer lies in that very faith itself. Diablo did not try to make Khan doubt his beliefs. Instead, he used them as the very tools of corruption. Every vision of Mirakodus strengthened Khan's resolve, but also twisted it subtly. The archangel spoke of sacrifices that must be made, of hard choices that holy men must sometimes embrace. He whispered that even Khan's most trusted allies might be corrupted, that only Khan himself could be trusted to see the great work through to its end. And Khan, in his pride, for even the most pious of men can fall prey to pride, believed every word. When Gregus Mazi realized in that final moment that the spell had been altered to drain the very life from all who participated save Khan himself, he did the only thing he could. He tore himself free from the magical matrix, disrupting the spell and saving the lives of his fellow citizens, but at a terrible cost. The spell, incomplete and unbalanced, did not send Ureh to heaven or hell. Instead, it cast the entire city into a liminal space between the mortal plane and the ethereal, a shadowy realm of eternal twilight, where time moved strangely and reality itself became fluid. In this timeless prison, the full horror of what had occurred became apparent. When the confused and frightened citizens of Ureh tried to leave their city and step into the sunlight, they discovered the true nature of their transformation. The moment the sun's rays touched them, they burst into flames, their flesh melting like wax, their screams echoing through the shadow realm. Lord Khan, still under the sway of the false Mirakodis, convinced himself and his people that this was merely another test, another sacrifice required on their holy journey. He used the powers the archangel had granted him to transform his subjects, to help them transcend their mortal limitations. But transcendence was not what awaited them. What Lord Khan created, in his deluded state, was not a city of enlightened beings ready for heaven. Instead, Ureh became populated by horrors, desiccated husks of humanity with gaping maws full of needle-sharp teeth, their eyes black voids of hunger, their flesh dried and pulled tight over ancient bones. These creatures still wore the remnants of their former lives, a merchant's medallion here, a woman's golden dress there, but nothing remained of the souls that had once inhabited those forms. They existed in a state of eternal hunger, forever seeking to consume life itself, to fill the void within them. And through it all, Juris Khan continued to believe in his righteousness. Even as his daughter Atana was transformed into one of these abominations, even as his city crumbled around him, he maintained that all was proceeding according to the divine plan of Mirakodis. But the incomplete spell had an unexpected side effect. Periodically, when the shadows fell just right, when the mystical energies aligned in specific patterns, Ureh would return to the mortal plane. For brief windows of time, sometimes just hours, sometimes a few days, the city would materialize in its accustomed place beneath Mount Nymyr. During these returns, Lord Khan saw opportunity. If he could find a way to complete the original spell to finally achieve the transcendence promised by his patron, then all the suffering would have meaning. He tried numerous times, but always failed, for he lacked the additional magical power necessary to complete such a monumental working. And so Ureh waited, appearing and disappearing like a ghost, a legend that drew treasure hunters and adventurers from across the world. Most who entered the city during its brief returns never left, becoming fodder for its hungering inhabitants. It was into this cursed history that Captain Kentril Dumont and his band of mercenaries stumbled. Led by the promise of treasure and glory offered by the Vizirai sorcerer Kvotsin, they had come seeking the legendary wealth of Ureh, unaware of the horror that awaited them. Captain Dumont was a man of contradictions, a hardened warrior with a romantic's heart, a leader who cared for his men yet led them into danger for gold. With him came Gorst, a giant of a man whose loyalty was matched only by his prowess in battle, and others whose names would be remembered only in sorrow: Albord, Jodas, Benjen, and more. They also traveled with Zale, a necromancer of the priests of Rathmar, who had his own interest in the mysterious city. Where others saw treasure, Zale saw an imbalance in the natural order that needed to be understood and, if necessary, corrected. When the mercenaries first beheld Ureh during one of its manifestations, they saw not the horrific truth, but an illusion crafted by Lord Khan, a city of celebrating, joyous people grateful to be returned to the mortal plane. The magic was so complete that even skeptical minds found themselves believing. It was Captain Dumon and Gorst who, following the research of Kehjistan, discovered that the key to light had been displaced from its position atop Nymyr. In an act of heroism that would seal their fate, they climbed the treacherous peak and restored the crystal to its proper place, believing they were helping to save a holy city from its curse. But in doing so, they had given Genghis Khan exactly what he needed: a way to make Ureh's return to the mortal plane permanent. Within Khan's palace, the mercenaries were treated as heroes. Lord Khan himself, still maintaining his regal bearing despite the centuries, welcomed them with open arms. His daughter Atana, her horrific transformation hidden beneath veils of illusion, enchanted Captain Dumon with her beauty and grace. The palace itself was a marvel of magical deception. What appeared to be gleaming halls of gold and marble were in truth crumbling ruins. The sumptuous feasts were dust and decay. The courtiers and servants were the shambling damned, their true forms hidden by Khan's sorcery. Only gradually did the terrible truth reveal itself, and by then, it was too late for many. Perhaps the greatest tragedy in this tale of horror was the relationship between Captain Dumon and Atana. For you see, beneath the corruption, beneath the monstrous transformation, something of the woman Atana had been still remained. She had been lonely for so long, trapped in a twilight existence, watching her city appear and disappear while bound to her father's mad vision. When she saw Kentril Dumon, something stirred within her that had nothing to do with hunger or the demonic influences that pervaded Ureh. She loved him as much as one of the damned could love, and he, enchanted by her beauty and the promise of a life of luxury and power, loved her in return. Even when the veils fell away and he saw her true form, broken, twisted, a walking corpse held together by dark magic, part of him still loved the woman he had thought she was. Their romance was doomed from the start, a last flicker of humanity in a place that had abandoned such concepts centuries ago. Lord Khan's plan was as ambitious as it was horrific. Using the blood of a willing mortal, either Captain Dumon or Kehjistan, he would complete a new spell, one that would not only anchor Ureh permanently to the mortal plane, but would allow its corrupted inhabitants to venture forth into the world. Imagine, if you will, the horror of such a thing. Thousands of demonic entities, wearing the shells of what had once been human, spreading across sanctuary like a plague. Each one a gateway for the forces of hell, each one hungering for life and light to fill the darkness within. The spell required precise timing, massive magical energy, and the alignment of the keys to shadow and light. It also required blood willingly given, or at least taken from one who had come willingly to Ureh. When Captain Dumon finally understood the truth of Ureh's corruption and Khan's mad plan, he and the giant Gorst attempted a desperate climb back up Mount Nymyr to destroy the key to light. They were pursued by hundreds of the city's monstrous inhabitants, creatures that scaled the cliffsides with inhuman agility. It was here that Gorst made his last stand. On a narrow ledge, with nowhere to retreat, the giant warrior held off wave after wave of the demonic horde, while his captain continued upward. When his position became untenable, when the creatures threatened to overwhelm him, Gorst did the only thing left to him. He jumped, but this was no surrender. As he fell, Gorst grabbed every creature within reach, creating an avalanche of bodies that cleared the mountainside and gave his friend the time needed to reach the summit. It was an act of sacrifice that exemplified the bonds forged between warriors who had faced death together many times. At the top of Nymyr, with the first hints of dawn approaching, Captain Dumon faced his greatest test. The key to light pulsed with power in his hands, while in his mind the voices of both Etana and her father pleaded, threatened, and cajoled. They offered him everything: power, immortality, love eternal. They showed him visions of himself as a king, as a general leading armies to spread Ureh's glory across the world. They promised that all his fallen comrades would be restored, that death itself would have no hold over him. For a moment, just a moment, he wavered. But then Kentrel Dumont thought of his men who had died trusting him. He thought of Gorst's sacrifice. He thought of what Ureh's gift truly meant: an existence as a hollow shell, a gateway for demonic forces, a mockery of life itself. And so, clutching the key to light to his chest, Captain Kentrel Dumont threw himself from the peak of Mount Nymyr. As Kentrel fell, something extraordinary happened. Juris Khan, in his arrogance and desperation, tried to catch the falling mercenary with a massive magical hand of ethereal force. But as the first true rays of dawn touched the key to light, the crystal blazed with power. The key burned through Khan's magical grasp and continued its plummet toward the city below. When it shattered against the ruins of Ureh, the explosion of light that followed was like a second sun being born. The shadows that had protected and imprisoned Ureh for so long were burned away in an instant. The corrupted inhabitants, exposed to pure daylight for the first time in centuries, screamed as they melted like wax figures cast into a furnace. The buildings, held together by dark magic, crumbled into the ruins they should have been all along. And Juris Khan himself, his illusions finally stripped away, stood revealed for what he had become. Not a holy man awaiting ascension, but a creature as damned as any demon. A puppet whose strings had been pulled by Diablo himself for so long that no trace of the original man remained. In his final moments, as the light consumed him, perhaps Khan finally understood the truth of his deception. Or perhaps his madness was so complete that he went to his destruction still believing in his false righteousness. We shall never know. When the light finally faded and true day came to the mountains, all that remained of Ureh was rubble and memory. The city that had once been called the Light among Lights had finally found peace in destruction. Captain Kentrel Dumont survived his fall, saved at the last moment by Etana, who used the final remnants of her power to slow his descent. In doing so, in choosing to save him rather than preserve herself, she showed that something of her humanity had survived even centuries of corruption. As the sunlight touched her, she simply faded away with a sad smile, finally free from the prison her father had created. Zale, the necromancer, despite grievous injuries, including the loss of a hand to Khan's servants, also survived. He had held off Juris Khan in the depths of the mountain, buying time for the mercenaries to complete their mission. In the end, it was his wisdom and sacrifice that had made victory possible. Of all the mercenaries who had entered Ureh, only Captain Dumont lived to tell the tale. The others, brave Gorst, young Albord, and all the rest, had paid the ultimate price to prevent a great evil from being unleashed upon the world. And so ends the tale of Ureh, dear listener. What lessons can we draw from this tragedy of good intentions corrupted and faith betrayed? First, that pride can blind even the most righteous. Juris Khan's certainty in his own holiness made him vulnerable to Diablo's deception. He could not conceive that he might be wrong, and so he never questioned the increasingly dark commands of his false angel. Second, that evil often wears the face of good. The Lord of Terror did not appear to Khan as a demon, but as everything the holy man expected from a divine messenger. It is when we are most certain of our righteousness that we must be most vigilant against deception. Third, that love can survive even in the darkest places. Etana's final act of sacrifice showed that even centuries of corruption could not entirely extinguish the human heart. And finally, that sometimes the greatest heroism lies not in gaining power or achieving glory, but in having the wisdom and courage to destroy that which must not be allowed to exist. Today, travelers through the eastern reaches of Kehjistan might come across a collection of ancient ruins beneath the shadow of Mount Nymyr. Few would guess that these weathered stones once housed one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, or that beneath the rubble lie the bones of heroes who saved sanctuary from a terrible fate. The wind howls through the empty archways and broken walls, and sometimes, if one listens carefully on a quiet night, it almost sounds like voices, praying, celebrating, or crying out in warning. But these are just tricks of the wind and echo, for Ureh is truly dead at last, its tortured souls finally at rest. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever realm warriors go when their battles are finally done, Gorst stands with his fellow mercenaries, that familiar grin upon his face, waiting to greet his captain when the time comes for their final reunion. The kingdom of shadow has passed into shadow itself, but its story remains, a warning and a promise that even in the darkest night, there are those who will stand against the darkness, no matter the cost.